Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the next installment in our 2022 speaker series, Southerly Presents People and Perspectives. My name is Nancy Easterling, and it is my honor to serve as the Executive Director of Historic Southerly. I already see people are signing into the chat. If you're new to us, as this is your first time, please do sign into the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from tonight. We tend to have people from all over the United States, sometimes even people outside the United States. So we will look forward to seeing where you are joining us from tonight. Tonight's speaker presentation is part of our Common Ground initiative, where we bring our community, very often our descendants, together to explore our shared history, the realities of our past, the realities of our present, and allow for conversations and discussions. Over the past year, we've had wonderful speakers, wonderful sponsors, such as the Maryland Humanities. Tonight's presentation and many throughout the next upcoming year are being supported in part by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We also have the Maryland Heritage Area Authority and such sponsors as the Boeing Company. We are grateful to them and all those who believe in the work that we are doing. Well, I have to tell you that when we heard that tonight's speaker agreed, there were cheers going up through the office. I didn't know if I got a chance to tell you to come out. We were so excited. We had seen articles about this. We were just thrilled. So I know you are here tonight to hear him and not me. So if you'll give me a moment while I put on my glasses, because yes, I am at that age now, I am going to introduce tonight's speaker. Kamau Sadiki is the immediate past president of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, or NABS. He is a lifetime NABS member and served as its vice president from 2011 to 2017. He is a member of the class of 2006 Underwater Adventure Seekers Scuba Diving Club based in Washington, D.C., a founding club of NABS. He is a certified PADI Divemaster. What does that stand for?
That's PADI. It's an acronym. PADI, Professional Dive Instructors. Oh my goodness.
So you weren't expecting me to ask you a question before we even got started, so I just threw you off. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Kamau is a board member and lead instructor with Diving with a Purpose, DWP, an international organization committing to resurrecting the stories of slave shipwrecks from the bottom of the sea through underwater archaeology documentation. DWP and Kamau were featured on the cover story of the March 2022 issue of the Captured Africans into the USA. He was a member of the dive team that documented the slave shipwreck São José Paquete de Africa in Cape Town, South Africa. The first slave ship documented in which captured was aboard during the wrecking event. He has worked on multiple shipwreck sites around Mozambique Island, Mozambique, and shipwrecks in the NOAA Thunder Bay, Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuaries, and Biscayne National Marine Park off the southern Florida coast, and in the St. John, United States Virgin Islands. In August 2015, he was a member of the first underwater archaeology field team to document a Tuskegee Airmen P-39 Airacobra airplane that crashed in Lake Huron, one of 5 that crashed in the lake during World War II training. I just gave you a snippet, everybody. He is incredibly accomplished. We are beyond thrilled. And I want you to know this man just got back from Cuba and is exhausted and is still here talking with us tonight. So, Kamau, we are so excited that you're here with us tonight. Take it away.
Well, thank you so very much, Nancy. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with your audience. I think it's an honor and a pleasure. And given all the great work that you all are doing at Southerly, actually I am very humbled to be able to use your platform to talk about some of the work that I'm doing, along with the organization that I represent, Diving with a Purpose. That mental slip I had earlier, that A stands for association. How could I not remember that? But PADI, Professional Association of Dive Instructors, one of the largest certification agency of scuba divers. Tonight's topic is something that I've been looking at for quite a while, ever since I've been scuba diving, actually. And since my retirement in 2017, I've gotten a bit more involved in the activity, and has actually have changed my life, turned my world in a totally different, profoundly personal and profoundly professional direction. And so I'm honored to share that experience with you all this evening. So hopefully it'll be insightful and you gain something. And I want to thank you, first of all, for sharing your time and with me this evening as well. So I'm going to start the slide presentation now and see if we can get this to work. Don't worry about the psychedelic. We're going to switch over. And if someone can give me a verbal okay that you're seeing my screen.
You're perfect.
Great.
All right, perfect. So this is the title of the presentation that I'm going to try to talk about this evening: Remembering Their Voices, Connecting the History and Archaeology of the South José Paquete, Africa, and the Clotilda slave shipwrecks. And I think the key word here that I want the audience to kind of keen in on is remembrance, because remembering is very powerful, and it's a very powerful part of our humanity, in us really identifying who we are and our basically existence in the world. So for me, remembering and knowing is very, very powerful. And if you have a sense of African cosmology at all, remembering is critically important. Remembering ancestors particularly is critically important, because if you don't have that as part of your awareness as you move forward in the world, it's like you're stumbling, you're misguided. You got this huge hole in your soul, not knowing where you came from and whose shoulders you stand on, how you get to be who you are and where you are. So just keying on remembering as I go through this presentation this evening. So some of the discussion topics I would like to touch on is, I'm going to talk a bit about the organization that I'm affiliated with, Diving with a Purpose, and our mission, who we are, just maybe a little brief on a couple of the missions that we worked on. I'd like to make the point about the slave ship and the impact of the slave ship itself, that artifact, a critical artifact that got us to where we are in, quote, civilization right now. A bit about the transatlantic and transoceanic slave trade. We in DWP like to focus on the transoceanic trade. A lot of academics in history and a lot of archival material on the transatlantic slave trade, but there was a lot of activity in other oceans as well, particularly the Indian Ocean, and where the South José originated from. And I'm going to highlight also known and unknown shipwrecks and sort of put that in sort of context, given the voluminous amount of activity in terms of ships themselves that was involved in the trade. And more importantly, talk about memory and remembrance, getting beyond the silence and the shame. And that silence and the shame is cuts two ways. One being the victims of the atrocities of the trade and those that perpetrated the trade. The victims not wanting to identify with such horror and terror and trauma, and those that perpetrated wants the world to forget. But we need to remember. And so I'll talk a bit about that. And then focus primarily on the South José and my experience working on the South José Paquete Africa mission and the Clotilda mission. And I'll try to wrap it up with a perspective that is not relatively new, but I've been thinking about going through these experiences with these slave shipwrecks, is that how do these artifacts speak to us? You know, we can do the hard science, we do the archaeology, but we engage these artifacts in a way that we touch and manipulate them. But how can we listen with our hands? And how do they speak to us and and share insights in terms of what they actually represent. So, and for me, I've sort of embodied the experience of working with these artifacts, and somehow that has given me some insight. So I'll touch upon that. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So DWP, Diving with a Purpose, was an organization that was founded back 2004 or so by two incredible individuals. Ken Stewart, an incredible visionary in a sense, working with young people in Nashville, Tennessee. He got together with another individual, Brenda Lasendorf, of the National Park Service down in Key Biscayne, the National Key Biscayne Park down in Key Biscayne, Florida. And so she had a number of wrecks down in the national park down there that she had to document based on the National Historic Preservation Act, but it was an unfunded mandate and say you need to document those ships. Serendipitously, Ken and Brenda got together, and Brenda said, I have these ships, you have the divers, how can we make this work? And Ken said, I can round them up. So Ken came back to the organization that was mentioned earlier, NABS, National Association of Black Scuba Divers, and he asked all the divers, said, hey, you all tired of looking at beautiful fish and reefs and so forth? You want to dive with a purpose? And everybody started raising their hand, and that's how we got started. And so what we do primarily is we train certified divers to document shipwrecks. We identify how to identify artifacts. We teach them the techniques of mapping, like trilateration, and actually doing drawing underwater, what we call in situ drawings, and ultimately some archival research and so forth. And we do this through an intensive program for about a week after we do some land-based training, and we help them develop those techniques very competently so they can go out on a mission and document some of these wrecks. And we've got a very strong partnership with NOAA in the Florida Keys, National Marine Sanctuary, and ultimately we develop maps like this. This is a map of a shipwreck called the Hannah M. Bell that was misidentified for a very long time down in the Florida Keys. But based on our work, we was able to develop this map, and the maritime archaeologist for the Florida Keys, Matt Lawrence, was able to identify this wreck as the Hannah M. Bell, a steamer from early 1900s. Excuse me. Another part of our program is called CARES, Collective Approaches to Restoring Our Ecosystems. It's our coral reef restoration program, where we teach young folks and adults the importance of our coral reefs, and our coral reefs are critically important. Every second breath you take actually comes from the ocean and from these coral reefs. So we are very much dependent on the ocean and these reefs, and we're trying to make young folks aware of it. So we teach them how to map and survey, and we also partner with coral reef programs in the Florida Keys to actually grow coral and outplant them on distressed reefs to try to help them recover. We also do community outreach. We don't just go into a community, like in case of the Clotilda, and document the shipwreck, leave a report, and then fly out. No. We engage the community, and community outreach is a key part of our program to inform the community of the work that we're doing and the connectivity of a particular wreck to that community and its importance in terms of its cultural heritage. So that's just as important, we think, as the archaeology. As Nancy mentioned, in August of 2015, we was fortunate enough to be part of a very, very important mission of documenting a Tuskegee Airmen P-39 Airacobra that had an accident in Lake Huron, excuse me, in 1944, in April of 1944. And this is the team and my colleagues that was part of that mission. And to my left, extreme left of the picture here, is Wayne Lasardi, the principal investigator. He calls us up to investigate that wreck. This is Frank Moody, the second lieutenant that was flying an airplane. He's encircled in red with his class photo there in the upper right. The aircraft went down on April 11th of 1944, and 70 years to the date, the county sheriff of the county up there was doing some recon work and trying to recover a tug that sunk, and he stumbled across the wreck 70 years to the date. And so the following year, Wayne called us up to document it. How did we know it was one of their airplanes? Well, we came across this flight recorder. This flight panel of the airplane was located. And on that flight panel was a radio call number. And that radio call number was 221226, the radio call number of Lieutenant Frank Moody. And we went up there and documented this wreck. This is me working on the tail section. This is the wing section of the wreck, still in archaeologically very good condition. You can see the Army star on the port side wing, even the red navigation light on the tip of the wing there. Even the cockpit section with the thick, almost 1.5 inch glass for bullet protection is still there. And the very space that Lieutenant Moody sat in when he hit the water very tragically and went down. This is a drawing by Wayne Lasardi, the archaeology of that wing section. You can see in the center of the photo, the drawing of the tires there. The tires were still inflated on this plane some 70 years later. In August of last year, because of COVID, we was delayed a couple of years. We honored them by placing a monument on the waterfront in Port Huron, on the coast of Lake Huron, there in Port Huron, Michigan. It's an obelisk-shaped granite artifact that honors these men that sacrificed their lives for basically for a country that they had to battle for identity and a right to fly these airplanes. So they gave their lives in deep respect for this country, and then received that in reciprocation. So we honor them, and that monument is there. If you're ever up in the area, we encourage you to get by and see it. This is it on St. Clair River, as St. Clair River pours out of Lake Huron there. Very beautiful plaza. Well, DWP also have a few partnerships that we collaborate with. One is the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And we do that collaboration through the Slave Wrecks Project, which is a collaboration of several organizations, the National Park Service, George Washington University, Aziko Museums in South Africa, and a couple of other organizations. Some of our strongest partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, is with the National Marine Sanctuaries, particularly Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuaries down in Florida. Society of Black Archaeologists. Most of those archaeologists was basically terrestrial archaeologists, but we at DWP, we have dive instructors in our organizations. One is Jay Hagler, and he was a dive instructor, and Jay has been very helpful in teaching these archaeologists how to scuba dive, and now they are very interested in maritime archaeology. And these are some of our shining stars here, Dr. Justin Donovan and Dr. Ayana Flewellen. Justin is a professor, now associate professor at UCLA, and Dr. Flewellen is at Stanford University now. They work with us as principal investigators on some of our projects. We've had a lot of media coverage. I won't go into deep depth there, but one in particular, as Nancy mentioned, we was highlighted on the March issue of the National Geographic, based on the work of Tara Roberts, who, by the way, is the National Geographic Explorer of the Year. She was just nominated and identified as the Explorer of the Year. Out of all the explorers that the National Geographics have, she was honored as the National Geographic Explorer of the Year just recently. So they was highlighting our work that we do on slave ships. This is a screenshot of Tara and myself down in the Keys. And this is one of the centerfolds of the magazine with another young up-and-coming archaeologist, Jewel Jeffries, who is doing her PhD work now at UCLA. So we're trying to prime the pipeline to bring up more and more of these shining stars to carry on the work that we're doing. So enough about DWP and more about the presentation for this evening. I kind of set this up earlier, so I'll just dive right in with some discussion questions. These are basically rhetorical questions that I want to sort of ponder as well as we go through. Some is sort of related to memory. Can you imagine what it would be like to live without memory of who you are, where you came from, your history, your culture? Just think for a moment, if you had no sense of any of that right now, what would your identity be? So memory connects a person to a history and ancestors. If you're disconnected from those ancestors and memory, how does it affect your identity within the human family? And for people of African ancestry, African descent, particularly here in the States and even throughout the diaspora, because the slave trade was a global sort of phenomenon, impacted practically every country on the face of this earth. So if we don't have any memory of how this all came about, how can we even have a strong identity of who we are? And more importantly to me is, how did it become possible for a nation founded on democratic principles of freedom and justice for all to allow over 250 years of shackled slavery and bondage for more than 5 million human beings? How in the shaping of so-called Western civilization has a global system of brutal bondage and oppression existed for more than 400 years and not be deeply embedded in our collective memory? Since we're still living the vestiges of this system right until the very day. So DWP again is focusing on these slave wrecks to be a part of that narrative, to bring back into memory these vessels. So I talked a bit about amnesia and collective memory early on, and how it sort of cuts two ways. On the victim side, because of the trauma, not wanting to being identified with such horrific trauma and the degradation of your own personal humanity, that we sort of forgot, and we whisper about it sometimes. But on the perpetrator side, those who perpetrated this crime against humanity, as I frame it, it wants to be forgotten. We want to move on. It's time to move on, as some of the languages say. But it's a critical part of our history, and it should be a part of our total collective memory, because cultural heritage is very, very important to our collective memory. This is a shot here in Washington, D.C., where I'm near. I'm out in the state of Maryland, but in Washington, D.C., there's a very powerful exhibit at the National Gallery of Art right now, but it closed this weekend if you want to get by there. It's Afro-Atlantic Histories, and it talked about the various connectivities along the Atlantic of the experiences of the African slave trade. And so I encourage you to get by there. So cultural heritage includes these cultural objects and collective memory of a community, and it's important sources of our history and cultural practices, particularly in identifying who we are, the both material and, more importantly to me, as I embody these experiences, is the immaterial. So I just want to sort of remember that. So the slave ship and collective memory. There's a lot that can be said about the slave ship and collective memory. Not enough has been said. There's been some very critical pieces that's been written about that. I'll sort of highlight one here. This is a drawing that's now called the slave ship, but it had another title by William Turner, a British artist back in the middle 19th century, 1848 or so. And now it's called the slave ship. And Marcus Rediker used that image as the title of his book called The Slave Ship, A Human History. It's a very critical read if you want to engage the subject of the trade and its impact on the human family. Marcus Rediker said in that book and outlined the importance of the slave ship. And I think it's worth taking the 45 seconds, a minute or so to read this. It says, the ship was thus central to a profound interrelated set of economic changes essential to the rise of capitalism, the rise of new lands, the expropriation of millions of people, and their redeployment in growing markets-oriented sectors of the economy. The mining of gold and silver, the cultivating of tobacco and sugar, we can add cotton to that, the concomitant rise of long-distance commerce, and finally, a planned accumulation of wealth and capital beyond anything the world has ever witnessed. Slowly, fitfully, unevenly, but undoubtedly with undoubted power, a world market and international capitalist system emerged. Each phase of the process, from exploration to settlement to production to trade to the construction of a new economic order, required massive fleets of ships and their capacity to transport both expropriated laborers and the new commodities. And he finished his statement with the Guineaman, which was his reference to the slave ship, was the linchpin, the key piece of the system. So the slave ship is very, very important. And to highlight that, during the transoceanic slave trade, if you're familiar with the Slave Voyages database, it's an online database, slavevoyages.org. If you encourage you to query that sometimes. We know that there was some 12,000 plus ships that was involved in the trade that forcibly transported captured Africans to the Western world, the Americas and the Caribbean. Those 12,000 plus ships made some 40,000 plus voyages across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. And out of all those voyages, we are aware of about 1,000 or so wrecking events that happened, but the location of which only about 15 or so are known, and about 10 or so has been scientific and archaeologically documented. And the sort of like the critical question becomes, such a pivotal event in human history, global history, why is it so much is not known about the critical artifact that was involved in this trade, i.e. the slave ships? It involved more than 12 to 15 captured human beings. Academics say about 12.4 million. Philip Curtin, who wrote a lot of history about the Atlantic slave trade, said it could have been possibly up as much as 25 million. But what we do know, it was the largest forced migration of humanity, or human bodies in the world history. So the slave ship is a critical artifact that we need to sort of pay attention to. Just some graphics I took. Slate.com had a beautiful graphic that showed some of the trade routes. And this is part of the latter part of the 18th century, showing the movements of some of those slave ships and the critical countries that played pivotal roles in the movements of those human beings. Great Britain, Spain, of course, the Netherlands, France, but the prime mover was Portugal. And during that period, almost 6 million individuals over the history of their involvement was moved out of their homes into the Western Hemisphere. 6 million, if you can imagine that. These were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, uncles, craftsmen, teachers, philosophers, griots, that was forcibly moved and taken away from their family, never to be reconnected, identified with them again. So, and if you go to Portugal today, it would be, as far as I know right now, it would be a challenge to identify at least 5 memorial markers that memorializes the African slave trade, and they played a pivotal role in that. I hope to travel to Portugal sometime, maybe in January, and we can do further investigation on that. As I mentioned, that's the number of ships that was involved in the trade. But during the trade, I have to highlight this as well. They wasn't just passive players. These people resisted. There was resistance from in Africa to with other African groups trying to capture them, to the manipulations of Europeans coming in and capture them, manipulating other groups in Africa. There was resistance going to the big ships in the canoes. There was resistance on the boats. There was resistance coming across the water. There was resistance, of course, here in the Americas during the whole period of enslavement. So we have to keep in mind that there was resistance, and these people didn't want to be enslaved. They wanted to maintain their humanity. You probably heard of the Amistad and Joseph Sinke Asimbe Pai, his African name. Some of the more familiar ones, Nat Turner and his revolt. Zumbe of Palmares, who resisted the Portuguese for almost the entire period of slave trading by establishing these quilombos, they were called, in the hills of Brazil, in and around Salvador, Brazil. But you can't remember, I cannot forget the terror and the horror that this whole process brought about. But in spite of the horror and the terror, there was resilience. There's a resilient community down in Mobile, Alabama. I'll talk a bit about later, called Africa Town. They've shown tremendous resilience in trying to remember what happened to their ancestors. So I'll highlight that a little later. As I mentioned, there was more than 12,000 ships involved in the trade, but these are just a quick list of the ones that I'm aware of, and I think in the historical record, academic record that's been recorded right now. The Henrietta Marie, which is a British vessel, and really got the National Association of Black Scuba Divers involved in this sort of work. Actually, in 1993, the National Association of Black Scuba Divers put a memorial marker on the shipwreck of the Henrietta Marie. The Guerrero, which is the primary work of DWP, we got involved in because we believe that part of the Guerrero wreck is in the National Park Service park down there, but most possible some is in the Florida Keys National Sanctuary as well. The José Paquete, Africa, that I was involved in, the Troubadour off Turks and Caicos, the Peter Morel in the Bahamas. Each one of these have incredible stories. Each one of those 12,000 vessels have incredible stories. But these that I'm listing now has incredible stories. Peter Morel, follow that one and what happened to that vessel as it sailed into the Bahamas. The Clotilda, I go into depth about. The Ouida, which it was a pirate vessel that was found off the New England coast there. The Queen of the Revenge, I'm sure you heard a lot about that vessel. The Blackbeard, that was a former slaver called the La Concorde, a French vessel. The General Abercrombie and the Mary off of St. Croix. The Friedenborg that wrecked on its return, trying to get back to Europe off the coast of Norway. And the Christianus Quintus and the Fredericus Quantus off the coast of Costa Rica. Again, 2 Danish vessels that got lost, and 600 or so people just wandered onto the beach of Costa Rica to mingle with the locals and try to figure out how they're going to survive. The Alalai and the James Matthews are 2 Alalai, a French vessel that wrecked off the coast of northern Cuba, and the James Matthews ended up off the coast of Perth, of all places, Australia. So those are the known vessels. And there are others as well that we are looking for. I might touch upon them later if time allows. But what I would like to do with the remaining time is maybe highlight just a few of those vessels and then dive into the South José Paquete, Africa, as I keep track of time here, and then the Clotilda, and understand that connectivity and their deeper meaning. The Merriman was a Dutch vessel. I'll just highlight real quickly that a colleague down in South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa, Jaco Bischoff, who's with the Zico Museum in South Africa, was searching for this vessel. It was part of the Dutch East Indian Company, as this slide shows here. If I can get it to come back, shows the activity of the Dutch East Indian Company, which is considered the world's first global conglomerate that was involved in a lot of activity, a lot of trading goods, including human flesh. On the Merriman, there was they captured hundreds of people off the coast of Madagascar, and they happened to capture, as part of those people, a gentleman named Masavana. He was a leader of the people in Madagascar, and they captured him with setting sail and trying to get back to South Africa. And there was a revolt on the Merriman. The captors was able to take over take over the vessel rather, and the crew retreated through the stern of the vessel into the captain's quarters, and they began negotiations. And out of desperation, the captain wrote a note, stuck it in a bottle, and threw it out the window. Hopefully that it will float on the beach and someone will help him. So Masavana and the captains knew that they had a problem. They didn't have the skills or the expertise to sail a vessel, so they had to negotiate. And during that negotiation, the crew said, "We will sail you back to Madagascar." and they set sail. And after sailing for a few days, they saw land, told Massavana that this is Madagascar. Massavana said, well, this is strange. This doesn't smell like Madagascar air. I don't see Madagascar birds and so forth. But they persuaded him that it was and told him that we'll send a crew, some emissaries ashore to prove that it is. And if it is, light 3 fires on the beach and we'll be home. But the people on the coast of South Africa saw the distress vessel out there, thought it was an invasion, so they sent a contingent of troops to the coast to wait it out. And so when those Africans came ashore, there was immediately gunned down. And when that bottle that the captain threw out of the windows was recovered by a young South African girl, was given to one of the troops that was there to protect the coastline. They read it. It said, light 3 fires. They lit 3 fires. Massavana saw the 3 fires. He said, Madagascar, let's abandon ship and go ashore. Unfortunately, it wasn't Madagascar. It was Cape Town, South Africa. And Massavana was eventually arrested. The ship went adrift somewhere north of Cape Town, around the Cape there. We think we might know where it is, don't know exactly at this point. But Massavana was eventually arrested. This is the bottle. Arrested and was buried on this island. You see an upper right picture here is an island. The island where Nelson Mandela was in prison, Robben Island. I want you in the lower right here, pay attention to that another marker there on the coast of South Africa. That is Cape Town in the center of the picture there. That's called Lion's Head. And that's a particular monument that's of importance to finding of the South José Paquete, Africa. This is Robben Island here, where the grave of Massavana is today. This is the Zong Massacre. You might have heard of the Zong Massacre, where an incompetent captain was trying to get to Jamaica, unfortunately misnavigated in and out in the broader Gulf of Mexico. He realized that he was short on provisions to turn around after several days sailing in the wrong direction. And decided to come up with this plan to collect insurance if he get rid of his cargo. So he commenced to throwing 133 African men, women, and children overboard in a nefarious attempt to collect insurance for his, quote, lost cargo. The Leusder is another horrific story. The Leusder was a Dutch vessel trying to sail into Suriname, Paramaribo, Suriname. And the Leusder was what's called a supermax vessel during the trade. It can hold up to about 700 individuals, and it was loaded to capacity, beyond capacity when it set sail. So on January 1st, 1738, it ran aground at the mouth of the Moroni River after he had sailed up the Moroni River, thinking it was the Suriname River, trying to get to Paramaribo, Suriname. So it reversed course and came out of the mouth of the river, and a storm hit, a violent storm. You think it was a hurricane. The captain gave the order to drop anchor. He dropped the bow anchor. The boat swang around, the stern slammed into the reef and began taking on water. He saw that the boat was not going to make it through the storm, so he issued the order to abandon ship. And so I think what happened next was one of the most horrific tragedies in maritime Atlantic slave trade history. Before he told the crew to abandon ship, he gave the order to lock the hatches of the cargo hold with 700 Africans captured in that hold. And over a 2 or 3 day period in shackles, these individuals fell into the sea, unable to swim or save their own lives. The Guerrero is another horrific story. I can go in a lot of depth here, but for the sake of brevity, the Guerrero was a pirated vessel. The Africans that would eventually end up on the Guerrero was hijacked from one African vessel to another. And they was sailing, trying to get to Cuba. That was intercepted by a British vessel that was part of the Africa fleet that the U.S. and the British had agreed to establish after the abolition of slavery in 1807, 1808. And so this British vessel called the Nimble gave chase. The Guerrero put up full sails, tried to run, and ran into Crayford's Reef off the coast of Key Largo. 41 Africans was drowned in that event. Nighttime fell. A salvage crew came out to assist the vessels. The captain got a little leery of these pirates, and as he should have. And over the night, these pirates came up with a scheme to hijack the salvage vessels, and they took 350 or so Africans onto those vessels and did eventually sail them on to Cuba. 120 or so was on the number. Those individuals end up in Key West, Florida, which was, again, a traumatic event, not only for that community, but for those individuals as well. Some of them, a few of them died along the way. They lavished in southern Florida there for over 3 years before they was repatriated into Liberia. This story is told in some great research done by Gail Swanson called Slave Ship Guerrero, and it was documented in a brilliant documentary called the Guerrero Project, a documentary that's narrated by James Avery. If you remember him, he was the father and the first Prince of Bel-Air. These Africans are memorialized in Higgs Beach in Key West, along with other Africans that was on the William, the Wildfire, and the Bogota. Excuse me. When those ships was captured by this African fleet, they was brought to this Higgs Beach. In the process, over 200 or so of them had died, and they was buried right there on Higgs Beach, where people have been enjoying themselves, suntanning, etc., until an archaeologist down there by the name of Corey Malcolm discovered, hey, there he was doing some subsurface sonar work, and he discovered these orderly placements of graves on the beach, under the sand there. And doing further investigation, he found out that this was where some of the slaves that were, some of the enslaved that were on the Clotilda were buried, and also the 294 Africans that was on the William, Wildfire, and Bogota was buried there as well. So if you're ever in the area, this is important history to bring back into memory. I'll get to the source of why we're here tonight, the South José Paquete, Africa, and talk about my experience working on this project. The South José was a Portuguese vessel that was sailing from Mozambique Island, trying to get to Maranhão, Brazil. And as it was coming around the Cape, the intent was to stop into Cape Town for provisions and continue on to Maranhão, Brazil. Unfortunately, the winds came up from the southwest, and when that does, it brings strong swells. South José got caught into those swells and eventually crashed. And so we worked with the Shipwrecks project, and this is a short film that was done by the National Park Service I'd like to share with you at the moment to talk a bit about the Shipwrecks project. And then in South José, how we got to that collaboration.
The African Shipwrecks project is a collaboration among 6 African and American partners to search for, document, preserve, display, and learn from shipwrecks related to the global slave trade. In February 2013, this international team of divers made new discoveries near Cape Town, South Africa, that with further study promised to identify the site of the São José, a ship that was carrying over 500 enslaved persons from Mozambique to Brazil when it wrecked in 1794.
The São José site is a pretty interesting site. It's very dynamic in that there's a lot of sand movement on the site, so it's not a very easy site to work on. There's a lot of kelp movement on the site, and there's a lot of surge. So. Well, what's been exciting this year is we've been able to get on the site quite a bit, and we have had our colleagues over from the States, and they brought a new dredgehead for us. So we were able to use that dredgehead quite effectively and work on the site and open up a new area that we haven't opened up before.
How was your dive, Kamau?
It was great. Fantastic.
Yeah. What did you get to see?
Oh, I found something of interest. It was a piece of iron slag, I think. It seemed like wood material. It had a fastener to it. And so, I don't know if it's significant or not, but maybe we can check it out a little further and we'll find out.
Aspect of marine archaeology has been African shipwreck sites. there's thousands of ships that was involved in the African slave trade, not just the Atlantic slave trade, but in the East African slave trade, which the Sao Jose was involved in. It was coming from Mozambique, heading around the Cape, as we speculate at this point, heading to Brazil. Of course, it never made it. So to document these sites, to bring out the stories of these Africans that was captured and put in these horrific conditions within the bowels of the ship, within the hull of the ship, and ultimately end up in a catastrophe such as a shipwreck. And just to imagine that agony, that suffering, the pain, is extremely emotional for me and humbling to a great extent, because it connects me directly with my ancestors. And for me to be able to dive that site, to just find a tangible piece of artifact or information, something to raise their silent voices, to tell their story that has been latent and quiet for so many years, is an extraordinary thing. This is just a quick listing of the partners that worked on the project and still working on the project. There's a lot more work to do there, including with DWP. The key investigator that you saw in that film, Jaco Bischoff, and his team has been doing incredible work on this project. And Jaco ran across the manifest of this vessel that gave us a lot of insight. And got two colleagues in Mozambique, Yolanda and Ricardo Duarte, has done a lot of archival work. They found the deposition of the captain, and the Dutch was very particular about keeping information, which is very good for us to do this research. And one part of the deposition here, the cop talked about the violence of the wrecking event and so forth, then making decisions to save the slave and the people, making a clear distinction between the slave not being people. And also talked about what happened to those that survived the wreck. 212 of them did not survive, but those that did survive was eventually sold into enslavement into the Western Cape. And as I mentioned, as part of this deposition, he mentioned that the ship and the cargo was under the lion's head. You can see highlighted in red. I mentioned the lion's head earlier. That's the lower left of this photo. And that's where the Sao Jose went down. In the center of this photo is Cherry Rock. We believe that's one of the rocks that eventually caused the demise of the Sao Jose Paquete, Africa. On this beach here, this real exclusive beach in South Africa, particularly during the era of apartheid. A lot of these exclusive condos and homes were built on this beach, and beachgoers was having a great time on this beach, while 212 souls lost their lives here. DWP making a point to treat these sites as very sacred sites. These are actually graveyards. So we honor that as we do this work, and keep that in mind as we do this work. This again is just an overview of the site of the project and how we did archival research and engaged the physical evidence and laid down the marker to do the documentation of the site. There's cannons on the site as well. This is another quick video to show how difficult it is to dive this site. And I'll just run this not very long. But if you're interested in doing some of this work, these are some of the conditions that you'll be in. There's a tremendous surge that pushes you back and forth. You actually go to where you're working and you see the diver going back the other way. You try to grab onto a rock. Not only the visibility issues, you can see all the kelp that's that's being stirred up there as the surge moves in and out. Even while it's calm on the surface, we're getting this surge. And not only that, the water temperature is about 45, 46 degrees. And yes, this is South Africa, and South Africa has great white sharks. Fortunately, we didn't encounter any during our dives. But one thing about doing this work, sometimes equipment doesn't work as we plan. And what you're going to see in a moment, this is a dredge head that Jaco was using to remove the sand, looking for artifacts. But right here in a moment, something's going to happen. It's a bit funny. We don't like for us to show this, but it happens. The buckling from the dredge head and the hose that's running from a pump on the ship it fails. And Jocko really didn't know what happened. That's the failure right there. He's diving with the buddy. The buddy grabs the dredge head. For some reason, Jocko didn't want to let go of the hose. Luckily, he didn't, because it would have been whiplashing all the way. He went to the surface and told him to turn off the pump, turn off the pump. And they eventually turned off the pump, and the pressure was reduced. He's still holding on. Oh, God bless him. And after the pressure was stopped, he's trying to figure out what the hell just happened. So that's one of the fun things of this stuff. But that dredging allowed us to uncover some very important artifacts. Jocko and his crew continued to dredge after we left and discovered these ballasts. These ballasts are used to stabilize the ship as cargo, human cargo particularly, is moving about, to make it move more efficiently through the water. And so as in the manifest, it listed there was 1,500 of these iron ballasts on the South Jose. So this was a key artifact in identifying the vessel. These are them after they've been conserved, and they are on exhibition now currently on the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and the South Jose exhibition on loan from the Ezekiel Museum in South Africa. Wooden pulley was found as well. This is it after it was preserved, and that's a wooden timber that I engaged, and it had a very embodiment of an experience that I'll talk about maybe a little later. This is a shackle that I found, another story that goes along with that. But for the sake of time, we'll keep moving it along here. We did some conservation work on this project as well while we were there. And just showing you very quickly here, you see the Isle of Mozambique and the trajectory of the South Jose. This is where the captives was embarked on the South Jose and sailing out of South Africa. On Mozambique Island, there's a mosque there that they were smuggling these, not necessarily the ones that was on Mozambique Island. We don't know for sure, possibly. That was on the South Jose, rather, but possibly they were smuggled through these tunnels and brought into this open courtyard and then out to sea through this door of no return. This is Dr. Lonnie Bunch, who wanted the South Jose to be a part of the opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So he was there to help us memorialize the South Jose. This is one of the elders, Ivano Ngachi, who was one of the elders of the Makua people in Musaril, Mozambique. We had a great ceremony that day. He eventually got some soil of the village, and he gave it to Dr. Bunch, told Dr. Bunch to take this soil to that wretched vessel who had wrecked and bring our people back home. Dr. Bunch gave the vessel to me and some other divers went back to that beach along with a corps of international press. The intent was to dive the beach, dive the wreck again to place the soil there, but you can see the surf was very strong. To the left, there's Cherry Rock I mentioned earlier. So we waded out into the water. Myself, representing people of African descent in the diaspora, that is Tara Vanderkert, who was the diver you saw went backwards off the boat earlier. And in the middle there is Tara as well. She's a Makua youth that's studying in South Africa. And we both went out into the surf to honor these individuals and bring back and to honor and do the wishes of the Makua people and the elders. It was a very moving sort of experience, to say the least. After we did that ceremony, we went back to the Makua village and told the village elder that we have fulfilled his mission. He had a long pregnant pause and said, now the rain that falls on our village is like the tears of our ancestors coming back home. We felt complete. So real quickly about the Clotilda story. The Clotilda was the last vessel that brought Africans into the U.S. in 1860. It was an illegal activity after the banning of the importations of Africans into the U.S. in 1808. But this gentleman by the name of Timothy Meyer made a bet that he could pull it off because there was increased tensions between the South and the North. Keep it in the time context. This is 1860, just a few months before the start of the Civil War in this country. So he went out and hired a captain by the name of William Foster. William Foster had the vessel constructed, and he made a statement later on about what happened to the Clotilda, that after he brought Africans into the Alabama River in July of 1860, transferred them to another river steamboat. He sailed the Clotilda up the Mobile River and set it afire, trying to destroy the evidence. Mobile, I'm sure you know where that is. For those that's in the U.S., right north of Mobile is a community called Africatown. Just want to show the proximity of Africatown to the location of where the Clotilda actually exists today, near this island here called 12 Mile Island. This is 12 Mile Island and the approximate location of the Clotilda. It's a restricted site now because of the importance of this artifact to world history. There's nothing like this that exists in the human record of the slave trade. What got this activity started was in January of 2018. There was a local journalist named Ben Raines, thought he had located the Clotilda. And so we were called in. We went in March of 2018 and investigated this wreck. It was a nice wreck, of course, but unfortunately it wasn't the Clotilda. It was much too big. This is the bow sticking out of the mud on the riverbank there. I'm documenting that bow in that wreck, doing the drawing of that bow stern. As we mentioned, William Foster said he burnt the wreck. There was some charred material they thought they had found there, but actually there was some biological material, some activity of the bacteria in the water that caused this look like it was charred wood, but it wasn't. So this is part of the team that was part of the investigation in the National Park Service. And to the left there's Jim Delgado, the principal investigator on the Clotilda work, probably the premier maritime archaeologist, definitely in the U.S., but possibly the world, particularly in naval architecture. Jim is brilliant. So we did, after we identified that wreck, that it was not the Clotilda, in July of 2018, we went back to that location, and with the help of the Alabama Historical Commission, they wanted to do an extensive search or survey of that stretch of the river. And we did that. We brought in some heavy lifting technology, some magnetometers, some side scan sonar, even some subsurface profilers that can penetrate the riverbed and see what's in the mud. And so this is the location where we confirmed the Clotilda to be. We have the property of the Mears. Timothy Mear is right there where William Foster possibly tied up the Clotilda to one of these, either this tree on the property marker probably was not there at the time, but more than likely he tied up to one of these trees here in this location. This is a side scan sonar of the image, and this is a very precious image because it is the only image that we can see of a slave ship that actually participated in the trade. The wrecking site of previous wrecks is scattered across a wrecking landscape, pieces scattered everywhere. But here we have the integrity of the vessel. About 80% of the vessel still structurally integrity. And more importantly, the cargo hold is still very much intact. The area where these 110 individuals were captured. There's a lot of debris that had settled on the site, trees and other debris that got snagged on the wreck over time. And so back in May, we just finished a mission to clear the site of all this debris so we can do an intense survey of the site. It's showing us some of the main features of the site, the bulkhead, but I want you to pay attention inside the bulkhead here. This is the forward bulkhead, and there was a temporary bulkhead along here, and this is the aft bulkhead. But this is the area where the 110 individuals were captured during their journey. The Centerboard Artifact, I don't want to talk much about that, but it's a major feature of this schooner, the Clotilda. It had copper sheeting. All these things began to add up for us to put the numbers together and say, yes, this is the Clotilda. This is our wreck and survey site on the left, and the evidence that we found and the specifications that we found in the archive of the wreck. And so it was almost one-to-one match all the way down the list to confirm that this was the Clotilda. You can dig further into the story in Dreams of Africa in Alabama, written by Sylviane Joff. One I like is the slave ship Clotilda and the Making of Africa Town by Natalie Robinson. And of course, Barracoons is here from the story from one of the survivors of the Clotilda, Kojo Lewis, as he's called now, but it's Kazulu. This is his African name. You hear in his own voice, Zora Neale Hurston, which was an anthropologist, interviewed him over the course of several years in the late 20s and recorded his story. But the book was just published a few years ago. This is Kojo Lewis here and some of the other descendants. Rishoda, who we thought was the last descendant, but a British researcher found in archives, Matilda McCree, who lived about until 1938. Kojo Lewis died in 1935, I believe. She's now believed to be the last survivor of the descendants of the Clotilda. As I mentioned, there's a very resilient community still in Africa Town, north of Mobile. This is the chimney of Gompa Peter Lee, who was one of the descendants, one of the probably the last major remaining artifact of that community that the indigenous people lived in. Excuse me, the descendants lived in from Africa Town. Kojo Lewis Kazula founded a church called Union Baptist. This is it back in the day, and how it currently exists today. And there's a statue, a bust of Kazula Lewis in front of the church that he helped found. It's a very important culturally historic site. If you get down there, I encourage you to visit it. This is right across from the church is Old Plateau Cemetery that's connected to the church. The state of Alabama and all this infinite wisdom decided to put a state highway right between the church and the cemetery that really separated and almost destroyed the community, but they survived due to just pure resilience. In this graveyard, there's some 18th, 19th century grave markers in this grave site. I believe that the highway construction disrupted some of these graves. There's a marker for Kazula Lewis here. This is not quite where he's buried. Don't know exactly where he's buried, but this is memorialized his burial. And this is the faces of the descendants of those that was captured, 110 that was captured on the Clotilda. This is Joycelyn Davis, who was once the leader of the Clotilda Descendants Association. She still works very closely with them. And you can see in their faces trying to restore memory and bring back into their memory their lost ancestors. So when we talk about engaging these artifacts, I'm going to wrap it up here real soon. The spiritual essence of our cultural material, having the voices speak to us. As we engage these shackles, these artifacts, we can do it scientifically. We can feel them and touch them, engage them, and so forth. And we do the hard science, we do the hard archaeology, but there's another total dimension to this work. And that dimension has to deal with the immaterial side of doing this work. I don't know the best way to frame it. That's every time I dive these slave wrecks, there's something that happens that embodies me from the experience. What I would like to do to sort of help it put it into context. I was talking about the Clotilda, and during the May mission, this last mission, I had the opportunity to dive it actually for the first time. I was a support diver in the past because of some paperwork issues, but this time I was able to dive on the Clotilda. And leading up to that time, I knew it would be a very moving and traumatic experience for me. So I along with a dear friend of mine, Sabrina Johnson, decided that we need to memorialize this first dive on this very important, critically important artifact. So I'd like to sort of close with this It's an ancestral prayer that we wrote, and it's called Ancestral Prayer for the Clotilda First Dive. And again, just imagine, as I mentioned earlier, in the Mobile River, there's zero visibility. You can't see. So it's diving like Braille. You're touching, you're feeling your way. And so I knew that the experience was going to be totally non-visual, that I would have to feel and sense and use other sensibilities to figure out what was going on. So this is the prayer that I wrote before I even got in the water. And it's called Ancestral Prayer for Clotilda First Dive, reviving the spirits who travel on the Clotilda. Beloved ancestors, your voices have been quiet for 162 years, but your silence ends now. Your voices and memory are lifted now from this wretched vessel through us, and we welcome you to speak through us. Our connection will never be broken. We are because of you. Thank you for reaching out to us, and blessings to your spirit always. So I entered the water, started feeling around on the Clotilda, came down on the bow along with my dive buddy. We filled our way, and when I got to that first bulkhead I showed you earlier, I grabbed hold to the gun wall, the upper wall of the ship, and I leaped over into the hole where these 110 Africans was captured. And immediately as I went over into that hole, I began to get tumbled around. And, you know, I got about 1,400 dives, and I know a little bit about peak buoyancy and stability. For more than a moment, it took me a while to get stabilized. I kind of afterthought is that's the experience that they went through on that voyage coming through the turbulent waters of the Atlantic. After I got stabilized, the embodiment of a sort of an embrace is what I kind of sensed that held me and got me stabilized. And we interrogated that hole a little bit further. The floorboard was missing. We found the post that was supporting it, and there was a second shelf, we believe, that was there that these Africans was laid and stacked on and packed in. It's about 23 by 18 feet, 110 individuals packed into this small space. And after experiencing that for a while and interrogating some of the other parts of the ship, it was time for us to come up. And when I broke the surface, I had the sense of the first breath that, you know, Kojo Lewis and Peter Lee and others felt when they came out of that hole and took a first breath of fresh air. And I just reflected on that experience as being one of the few persons of African descent that's ever experienced the reality of being in an actual cargo hold of a slave vessel where our ancestors was captured. So I hope that prayer does them honors. So I just wanted to highlight that because there's other ways of knowing that we have to pay attention to here. And by feeling and touching and manipulating these artifacts and listening through our hands, we can have deeper insight. There's an academic in Australia that talks about this a little bit. The natural constructive processes do not always work when you're managing the intangible, but unless such issues are addressed, there will be a continuing disconnect between the best outcome for collections and for traditional owners of cultural information. Once sensitized to capturing and working with intangible elements, museum professionals can be transformed into a new realm of understanding, and I believe deeper insight. So this is the phase 3 part that I kind of alluded to. That's the whole hole there. And that's me entering the water on that first dive. And that's the prayer I just recited. This is one of the artifacts that I brought out. This is part of this, we believe, the pulley system that was part of the stirring. And actually, if you look real close to that, the rope that was used in the pulley system is still embedded in this pulley. Some of these artifacts will be in Africa Town Heritage House that's been constructed. And again, we want to continue the legacy because we have a swim to scuba program in Africa Town. We're teaching young folks how to scuba dive. This is one of our first efforts down there. And can you imagine some of the young people who are direct descendants of those individuals that was on the Clotilda going back to that vessel and actually diving down into that hole of that vessel and having the similar experience that I have. Hopefully we will get them there one day. A little bit about the ongoing work. That's documentaries to Clotilda. This is streaming now on NatGeo. And there's a very powerful film called Descendant that's just been produced by Margaret Brown. It's just been picked up by Netflix and Barack and Michelle Obama's production company called Higher Ground. And it's going to premiere probably in the fall, so look out for it. It's telling a profound story of the community down there, the descendants who came off the Clotilda. If you're ever in Washington, D.C., visit the exhibition. DWP has ongoing work here of some important ships that's part of the history. You can see the Leusder there and other works that hopefully we can help tell the story. So Nancy, with that, I know it's a bit long. I'll end it with that. And I'll stop my screen share and you can come back.
That was amazing. It was not too long. Did you even think that? Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Especially, we're so honored that you shared the spiritual connection you had with that. I can't imagine what it was like the first time on your first dive that you reached out and touched something that you knew came from an enslaved ship. And I'm just so grateful that you shared that. There are so many people. I just want you to know there's so many people. We've got people from North Carolina, California, Florida, Pennsylvania, Mississippi with us tonight. We have some people from some diving with a purpose. So we have some people and some fellow divers tonight. You also have some of our Sauterly descendants who are on tonight. And I do want to get to a few of Q&A while we can. Don't know if I'll get to everybody's. I'm going to try. If you have a question, feel free to put them in the chat, but we'll start going through a few of them right now. So one of our trustees, John Felicitas, had a question for you. And it's a very good one. How are these ships protected from poachers? Because once people find out about things, you worry about the integrity. Yes,
absolutely. Very important question. And of course, it's challenging. It depends on the site. In the case of, just real quickly, a few examples. In the case of the Henrietta Marie, the site was actually reburied. So it's protected. It's reburied back under the seafloor, so it's not even accessible anymore unless you re-dredge it. In the case of the Clotilda, for example, it's been designated as a National Heritage Historic Site, and so it's a restricted area, but it's still open and somewhat accessible. And we had one incident right before we were there this past May. I won't highlight, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult, particularly those who don't want this memory to be brought back into memory. We have security systems around the site to help us prevent any sort of illicit activity and trying to desecrate these sites any further. But it's very difficult. So we try to get these sites identified and codified as national heritage sites as quickly as possible, and that provides some protection. But it's just awareness of individuals and people and providing and respecting these sites. Are these all just alternate spellings of the same thing, or is there one correct one? Yeah, just alternate spellings. Historical records have all the different spellings. So what seemed to be predominant is Clotilda, Clotilda, and that's the one that the descendant community is using. We're not telling them what to do. We're basically following their wishes and directions. So we're calling it the Clotilda. Makes sense. So Tiffany asked, were any of the shipwrecks found on the southeastern coast of the U.S.? Southeastern coast? The Guerrero, again, there's a lot of very strong circumstantial evidence. The Guerrero was found off the coast of Key Largo, but still some work needs to be done to really verify that. We don't have actually the real strong smoking gun say this is the Guerrero, but we got a lot of circumstantial evidence say it's located within the boundaries of the National Park Service and the Florida Keys National Sanctuary. So we got a bit more work to check out some more sites to verify that. The Henrietta Marie, again, is off about 30 miles off the coast of the Florida Keys. There's the Reader. This was in southeast, but in northeast, that was found off the coast of New England. The other vessels in the Caribbean for sure. The Peter Morrell that I mentioned earlier, the Troubadour off Turks and Caicos, but off the coast of the U.S. Those are the two main ones that come to mind, the Guerrero and the Henrietta Marie.
Yeah, I was stunned when you said 15 ships. 15
out of 12.
That's stunning to me that you only know the locations of 15. I'm just, is that proportionally for that time period with wooden ships, which I know have to be harder than more contemporary vessels? Why so few?
Good question, Nancy. The only thing that I can surmise it to is lack of interest, not wanting to be a part of the historical memory, given the incredible history and narrative that these vessels can tell and inform us about our human history and our cultural history. So DWP recognized this some tremendous deficit in trying to address it, but not only DWP, there are some academics and others that's doing this work as well. And similar to this, maybe they can say there's at least 50 ships that we know of that was involved in the trade that's been thoroughly documented, and we know that story.
Just like we're trying to preserve slave dwellings throughout the United States before those stories are lost.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's trying to give voices back. One of our descendants, Jerome Spears, who has been one of our presenters before, had a question. Fascinating presentation, he said. Would you imagine that there would ever be enough effort or resources applied to all of these untold narratives? And thank you for all you do. And I think that answer is automatically no. But go ahead, and because I don't think you could be, but wanted to get your perspective.
Yeah, the material culture is so rich and so voluminous. Yeah, resource-wise, to really capture it all would be a tremendous undertaking. Just to do one of these missions requires a lot of resources, and sometimes it's project specific. In case of the Clotilda, a lot of that's been invested already, and a lot more needs to be invested. We got the story of the Wanderer that hadn't even been told yet. The Wanderer was the penultimate, or the next to the last vessel that brought Africans into the U.S. through Jekyll Island in Georgia in 1859, right before the Clotilda. It's an incredible story. And the Wanderer had 400 individuals that they brought into the U.S. illegally and put into slavery, 1859. And so that vessel was eventually confiscated by the Federals and used during the Civil War effort. Post-Civil War, it was repurposed. It ended up crashing off the western coast of the Misi Punta Peninsula off of eastern Cuba. We know that's where it went down, but no one has a really approximate location where it is. We like to get engaged in that work, and to, of course, do work down there is tremendously challenging. But it's part of the critical work, and we want to tell that story. And there's a few others that we have that we want to talk about that I flashed up real quickly. But to resource those projects, as he said, it's tremendously challenging. And unfortunately, we have to sort of prioritize and figure out what would have the most impact. I hate to make those comparisons because I think they're all important, but from a project, real practical logistical, but
we love those donate buttons. As nonprofits, we do. A question from Mariana. I continue to want to learn more. I'm keeping the Tara Roberts article on my desk. Will you be doing any additional public speaking engagements, or any members of your organization doing any other doing more speaking?
Yeah. Good question. We have a lot of our other members of our team, we do public presentations all over. Yeah, I've gone to science museums and other nonprofits and schools, and I'll be doing something for libraries in North Carolina. So we like to reach out to folks and talk about this. So there's other folks on our team that can make these sort of presentations as well. So if you can reach out to us, I think I put up my email address. That's my first name dot last name at divingwithapurpose.org. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and you can reach me through that or go to our website. You can contact us through that way as well if you'd like for us to come and present. We do corporate presentations as well. This year was the first year of anniversary of Juneteenth being an holiday, so a lot of us did a lot of corporate presentations in terms of their diversity work. So yeah, we do a number of presentations all over.
Well, you've piqued everybody's interest. David Dederick was asking if there was any support in this effort from the National Endowment for the Humanities, or how there might be a way to get some additional funding.
We do a lot of work based on grants, but we haven't done, to my knowledge, a few of my colleagues are online. I think I saw a few of them there. Can help me remember. I don't think we got anything from the National Endowments. I don't think we even approached them. We primarily get national heritage type grants. We've done some work through our partners with grants from some of the embassies across the world. But nothing from the National Endowments of the Arts. But if they have any ideas, we're wide open to listening.
Yeah, that might be a fit. That really truly might be. Another question from Cynthia said, "This presentation and the work of DWP is spiritually captivating. Will this?" She was asking if this will be available later. Absolutely, guys. This is going to be you're going to actually, if you're here tonight, you're going to get a replay. You're going to be able to watch this again, because you're going to be like me. You're going to have to go back and watch and catch all the little nuances of things that you want to cement in. So it will be available eventually. This will be up on our YouTube page, so you can share it with other people. This was such an incredible presentation. I know many people here are going to want to watch it again. I don't know if in our talking you would realize we're actually a UNESCO site of memory for the Slavery Project. We are a Middle Passage Port Marker site. We do know the generous Jenny back in the early 1700s brought over 200 people to be enslaved directly to Sauterley, and 29 died under horrific conditions before they even made it here. So we're going to be doing we always do an annual remembrance as a UNESCO site of memory for the roots of enslaved people. This is going to be a really important day, and so many memories associated with really the work that you're doing. So we hope we can get a lot of people that can join us that day. I know if you've been looking at the chat at all, there are so many thank yous to you for this presentation tonight. It is just incredible. And thank you for your time, for sharing this. But thank you for the work that you're doing to bring this awareness to our nation, because I know that we, Sauterley and so many others, are trying to bring these stories that have too often been hidden back into the light, so we can remember them, remember lives, remember the people behind those lives, and be able to collectively kind of reshape what we knew about history and how we thought about our history, so that we have a better understanding. So appreciate it so much.
Sure, Nancy. I appreciate it, and definitely try to make the August 20th event. I think be leaving for Mozambique either the day following, but I definitely probably can make it down. I'll make an effort.
You're not that far away. You can come down for the day.
Sure.
It'll be a great send off to you. So hopefully that works.
By the way, did you mention the name of the vessel that brought people into Sauterley?
The Generous Jenny. And I can send you that. I'll send you some information about that so you can see the ship.
You never
And
know.
a little bit about our Middle Passage connection. So I will make sure that I share that with you. And some of this can also be found, I believe, on our website, but I'll make sure that I can share that with you so you know that. Because I don't know what the ultimate destination of the Generous Jenny was. Now I'm curious to know if that might be something you're doing one day.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Okay.
Now we have stuff to find out.
Right.
So to everyone joining us tonight, thank you so much for being part of this. Kamau, thank you, Kamau, for so generously sharing your time. For everybody out there in our broadcast tonight, please join us on August 20th. Mark your calendar. This Day of Unity and Healing is going to be amazing. And then in September, we'll start back up with some more virtual presentations